Today, I want to talk about the flood of spiritual content and the overwhelm that it causes. So, you've watched hundreds of spiritual videos, but you still feel lost, right? Why is that? It's because the spirituality without any structure just becomes noise. And this noise is due to the fact that there's nothing for you to ground yourself in. There's nothing for you to kind of like anchor your knowledge in because it's all over the place and there's no like definitive correct answer. But you might say like spirituality is very subjective or personal, but there's actually an objective science behind it. And once you understand this objective science, it's like a key that unlocks spiritual wisdom and is just a total game changer. So, I want to share some tips with you based on this objective science that will help you to realign yourself every time you feel like you're getting lost in that sea of information, that sea of endless spiritual content out there. And this is based off the works of Rudolf Steiner, who was a mystic who wrote over like 40 books and lectured extensively over his lifetime on the very subject of spiritual science. And so I'm going to be pulling from his body of work. Okay? So, you ever wonder why you're drawn to spirituality in the first place? It's usually one of three reasons. You're either trying to find meaning in life, you're trying to develop parts of your inner self, or you're curious about life in the universe and you want to understand these things. So, my tips are centered around these three core motives. So, if these resonate with you, then please stick around. So, step one, which is finding meaning in life. This is what I call seeing the spiritual in the physical. Because what you have to understand is everything on the physical plane stems from a spiritual reality. So we as matter are just reflecting what's happening in the spiritual world. So you know that quote? There's that quote that says, "You are not a physical being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a physical one." That's what I'm talking about. Is that we in this development of our times are so caught up in materialism and matter that we think that we are actually having spiritual experiences. But what I'm trying to say is that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. So that's the first tip, is seeing the spiritual in everything around you. You start to try to see everything as a spiritual event. And in this way, you take the spiritual into yourself during life. Because if you don't take the spiritual into your life, eventually when you pass, you will go through a stage where you transition into another plane, into the spiritual plane. But that will be extremely difficult if you've never taken any preparation during material life to take the spiritual into yourself, to understand the spiritual, because you'll go into that world after death and you'll be in a completely foreign world and you won't be able to find your bearings in it, as well as if you were to take everything around you during earthly life as a spiritual event. Then you'll enter that space and you'll realize things like, oh, this is actually the spiritual world, and I have to find my way in, and I have to do this, and this is how I navigate it. So that's the first tip, taking the spiritual into yourself. By seeing everything around you, start to try to see everything around you as a spiritual event. That's why ancient cultures practiced the art of dying before death. They had these death rituals so that they could experience that, and that was training so that when they actually did die, they'd be ready. So the second tip is development of inner self, right? You want to develop parts of yourself. Everybody has things that they want to fix. People call it like shadow work or working on themselves. You get my point. what is helpful to understand around this point is that we are not just physical beings. We are actually composed not of one, but of four bodies. These four bodies were known by all ancient religions and spiritual practices, and they may call them different names, but they can be simply put as the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the I. Right? The I is the spiritual core. It's our ego. It's what this earthly carnation grants us, and this is the stage where we develop the ego or the I. That's why we are so individual in our natures during these modern times. So the astral body, which is one stage or one body beneath the I, is where all our desires and temptations lie, base and noble. The base and the noble desires, the good and the bad. And it's our job to be able to lift ourselves up and, rise above these temptations. And we do that using the I. But what do you do to strengthen the I? Well, you do spiritual exercises. And so I'm going to share 3 spiritual exercises with you. Very simple, very basic, but easy to implement. So the first spiritual exercise is called free thinking. And this is training your head. You think of an object and you only think of that object. And you don't think about anything else, but you can think about anything associated with that object. So for example, a chair, you can think of a chair, you can think of a couch chair, you can think of a desk chair, and you can have all these associations, but you have to always come back to the chair. In this way, you start to train your mind to follow you, not the other way around. I would start with about 5 minutes a day, but try to work your way up to try to get to like maybe 10 minutes a day, or even like 15, 20 minutes a day would be a really good practice. So that's the first one. The second exercise is called the willing exercise. And the willing exercise is to train your body. So what you do here is you choose an action or choose to do something that you would never normally do. And in this way, you train your body you train the spiritual aspect of your body. For example, watering a plant. Let's just say that you don't have plants or you don't really go and water plants, but you go and you water this plant and you do it every single day. And it's not about how hard this thing is, but it's just about doing something that you would not normally do, so that you force yourself and you build spiritual strength through your body by doing that. It doesn't have to be a hard thing, but the important thing is to do it consistently and to do it with discipline, like your life depended on it, and do it every single day, right? And do this, I would say, for about a month. And it could be anything, but it's something that you would not normally do. In that way, you train the spiritual aspects of your body. This last exercise is called devotion. And for this one, you have to try to bring a feeling of reverence into your everyday life and try to really have a feeling of reverence for everything around you. Try to be devotional. Try to find those things in your life and try to give yourself up to those feelings of devotion, of admiration, a feeling that something is really worthy of your reverence. Now this one may seem simple, but it's very, very powerful, because this one is the one that will attune your emotional body to the spiritual world. Your emotional powers are what actually helps you to see in the spiritual world. And you have to work your way into that, though, because we in this in our human organism, we're not attuned to be able to have that fine sensitivity in our feelings, and this will help, this exercise of devotion. So we've gone through seeing the spiritual in everything and of developing yourself through these exercises. Now, if these tips, you like these tips so far, then this last one is going to be essential. And this last one centers around having a curiosity about understanding life and the universe. There's a flood of spiritual content out there, believe me, I know. But it's impossible to make sense of it all if you don't have like a structure or a blueprint for it. Okay, so just to break it down very, very high level, you have man, and you have to understand man, and you start with man and you start with earth because they reflect each other. And earth is a spiritual being that evolves. It's evolved before and it will evolve again. Right now, we're in the fourth major phase of evolution of our earth. And in our times, we're in what's called the post-Atlantean epoch of humanity. And the post-Atlantean epoch is where logic and materialism are reaching their peak. And in fact, they've already peaked. And because of this, the task of our times and of humanity is that we must see things in a new way. Because we can no longer we've already taken logic and materialism to its very highest state of what it could do for us. And now we must do things in a new way. So what is this new way? This new way is that we have to now, using our logic and materialism, come all the way back into understanding spirituality. So the old Atlanteans had this sort of clairvoyance, which we have lost. And we must come back to that, but we don't have the vision anymore. But we must come back to it through our logic and through our knowledge of materialism and the physical sciences. And so that is the task of our times. We are to study spiritual science, and we have to do it through our logical and materialistic minds. And we must come back to the spiritual and rise back up again. We fell into matter as we incarnated on earth, and we have peaked through that development. And now we must return back up through matter into spirituality once again. And this is not only how we develop personally, but we also do something for the earth. When we reach noble heights, we ennoble the earth to evolve higher also. So we, the microcosm, participate in the grand macrocosm, and we leave our mark on eternity. So spirituality can be overwhelming. There is an endless sea of information out there, but hopefully these tips that I've shared give you some sort of structure and baseline to reorient yourself whenever you're getting flooded with all this information. You can kind of stick to these buckets and try to find your way through and try to cut through some of the noise. So thank you for your time today. If you enjoyed this content, please come back for more. I love sharing this kind of stuff, and I'm going to be sharing a lot more of it on my channel. So thank you, and see you next time.